I'm Melanie Swayze, a global real estate advisor with Gibson Sotheby's based in Metro Boston. I closely advise homebuyers and sellers of all stages of life, guiding them to intelligent, winning decisions.
I'm Derek Lumpkins, a real estate investor with a background in community organizing. I also enhance equity and inclusion initiatives at companies and organizations, and I guide leaders through executive coaching.
When we get together, we dive into the intersections of culture, class, mindset, and Black freedom.
Welcome to the Black Landing Forum,
a podcast about Black wealth, power, and land.
Hey, good morning, Melanie.
Good morning, Derek Lumpkins.
What's going on?
Well, it's kind of like a new time in the world for people. Last week, the world was graced with a brand new pope.
I was just thinking about that because I saw an article in The Guardian last week that was talking about the Pope. So, for people who aren't aware, the new Pope is from the United States. He's an American, but he has a very interesting family history. So what some people, probably just folks in the Black community, are calling him the first African-American Pope, because all of his grandparents are from, I believe all of his grandparents are from the Caribbean, but two of them, his two grandmothers, are from Hispaniola. So one, I think, is from the Haitian side and the other's from the Dominican side. And when they came over to the States, they ended up in New Orleans, and they ended up in the Creole/Black neighborhoods of New Orleans. And, part of what we talked about in our last episode was how the highways that were built in the 40s and 50s to displace a lot of Black people and made them move. This was also during the Great Migration. And that is the history of his family. So they lived in neighborhoods that were raised to make place for the highways. And then the family moved north to Chicago and ended up on the south side. So, it's just interesting, it's interesting timing to read about how this Pope is, pretty much I won't say he's a mirror, but his history traces the history of our conversation, the history of some really important events in the 20th century.
According to the census in the mid-1880s, I actually didn't realize it was both grandmothers. What I read about was his maternal side. And this is not generations back. This is like 2 generations ago. Very recent history. His actual grandparent, who he would have known growing up. So at least that side of the family, when they landed back in Louisiana, because I think one or two of the parents in that mix actually originated in Louisiana, somehow ended up in the Caribbean. I think there's a lot of back and forth, as had been happening during the trade of African bodies. And so in New Orleans in the late 1800s, the census had them listed as Black.
Mm-hmm.
By the 1920s, once they've arrived in Chicago, some short time after they arrive in Chicago, settle in that neighborhood, the census lists them as white. And so, at least according to that Guardian article, and thank you for sharing with me, it sounds like they strategically decided to pass.
Well, when you say them, do you mean the grandparents or do you mean the parents?
Thank you. That's a really good point. This would have been the grandparents. So his mother's parents. This is not that long ago.
They were passing. I mean, there's books
They
about
were
this. There's
passing.
novels about this. They were passing.
They were passing. And that Guardian article also tracks, it overlays the time period when Plessy versus Ferguson went into effect and then was eliminated because of a new Supreme Court decision in the 50s that said segregation cannot be equal. But the Plessy versus Ferguson, which I guess would have been in the late 1800s, said that you can be separate and equal. I believe that was it. So that was the era in which they made their move to the north. And that was the circumstance. You are moving into a place that's it's less antagonistic than the Deep South, but you still have to be really strategic. Neighborhoods were definitely being bifurcated and separated based on color lines and racial lines. And he is a direct result of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So let's also tie in some other things. So for folks who listened to the last episode or watched the last episode, we are bringing back Adam Paul Susaneck, who gave us a great conversation about the highways and gentrification. Well, we didn't touch gentrification, but the highways and urban renewal and those things. So we're going to follow up on that conversation now. And, just one of the things I've been thinking about, I don't know where you landed at the end of that, but I've been thinking about, well, kind of two things. So one is, when will the United States get over its addiction to racism? So that's one. And I know that's the big question. You hate when I ask big questions. Oh, you love the big questions. Okay, I always ask those big questions.
You do.
But bring it down to a more, bite-sized piece. What are people talking about when they see these highway superimposed images over neighborhoods? What are people thinking about? Like, what are residents of metropolitan areas thinking about? Not just folks in the neighborhoods that were affected, but people in other neighborhoods and in the suburbs. Like, is there any interest in a metropolitan-wide movement to address these? It's kind of a thought I was having.
Yeah. Let's see what Adam can share too about success stories where people are taking this on. Adam, who is an architect and urban planner and just truly geeks out about mapping this history, making it visual for us. Let's bring him on.
Okay. Hey, Adam.
Hey,
Welcome
thanks for
back.
having me back. Thank you.
Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, so Plessy versus Ferguson was 1896. It was actually like 2 days ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just the anniversary of it, so kind of interesting.
Wow.
All these things are coming back around.
Yes. We're not far from it. And yeah, so then that would have been that the family might have just left Louisiana or was still in Louisiana because the 1887 census is what listed them as Black. Yeah, so they were still there then during Plessy versus Ferguson when that was right there. And actually, that decision came out of Louisiana. It came out of where they were living, right? So that tells you what the time was, what the tenor was. And then 20 years later in Chicago, they're listed as white with the last name Martinez. It's really interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. Well, it's also interesting that they were displaced in New Orleans that early. I'm not because of the highway, right? So they moved in 1920. I'm not sure what highway they're talking about in this article. That's actually, I'm a little skeptical of that. I mean, I'm sure it was a road project, but a highway being built before 1920, that's really that's too early. That 1920 is still the heyday of the tram networks, the transit networks. We're not really building limited access highways yet.
Maybe the idea of highway has just evolved over time.
Exactly. It might have been some sort of urban renewal project with a road component, but we weren't doing.
And what they say is that was meant to tie what's now the French Quarter to the suburbs, I believe. So it was meant to do the very thing that highways ultimately did throughout the U.S. is tie what was becoming the suburbs to some kind of like attractive central core inside the city that was meant for white people going back and forth for entertainment and for work.
Exactly. And that's sort of where we left off last time.
Yeah.
And I can start touching on that if you want, unless you have other.
Sure. No,
well, so this was the point that I didn't exactly make last time. This is the point that the purpose of these highways that sort of radiate out from the central core. So where we left off last time was basically historically, white flight had happened. So now this situation has arisen in which they're in cities across the country, that New Orleans, San Francisco, Boston, Miami. There's a surrounding the downtown area. There is, or even further out than that, there's the white suburbia that's formed. So this is like early 50s basically. This white suburbia has formed, and it surrounds what is now a predominantly non-white, quote unquote, inner city, which itself then surrounds the traditional central business district.
That's right.
The CBD or the commercial core, so it's like a donut. So there's the commercial core, then the quote unquote inner city than the suburbs. And that, in terms of car traffic with the existing roads, was just a nightmare because a lot of the jobs were still in the central business district, so people were commuting back and forth with cars increasingly because these suburbs had been built on land that was not really accessible before cars, but they're commuting through these areas, and the highway bill comes along in 1956. Providing cities basically a blank check, states technically, but cities basically a blank check. And, the inner city is just viewed as an obstacle.
Yes.
It's just literally in the way. So what does it matter? Obviously, we have to cut through there to connect the suburbs and the white people who are living there to the economic opportunities in the core of the city. And that's, I'm almost quoting Deborah Archer. If I mentioned her last time, probably. She has a new book out, Dividing Lines.
Mhm.
President of the ACLU. She's a professor at NYU Law. But the point of the highways, it serves like a double-edged sword there because of where the inner city physically is. The people who own the businesses and the property in the commercial core view that as ripe for potential expansion of the commercial core. What we might call, it's a form of gentrification, but this is where you see like big civic centers being built, big convention centers being built, big stadia being built. And those either are in a redeveloped CBD or punching out into the inner city. And the people are just expendable. It does not matter.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
we had a conversation at one point before we started recording where you said that the planners would rather have nothing there than to have Black and brown people there.
Yes, because there's not only are they sort of in the way between the people that they want to attract to work there, but their physical presence is viewed as a hindrance to growth, both spatially because there's a neighborhood there's a neighborhood adjacent to downtown where they want to redevelop, spatially, but it's more racially. It's
Racial
more. It's just that the non-white black bodies. The idea is that it reduces property values. It's not just black.
You put a dollar, put an economic value to that presence.
You put an economic, exactly.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like the fact that this community is there is actively, they view it, and is actively scaring away potential investors, and then scaring away whatever remaining white population there might be, and then scaring away the white commuters who maybe then want to find a job in the suburbs, and then the businesses maybe think about leaving the downtown skyscrapers, and that's why it's really the property owners downtown, the people who own the skyscrapers, the traditional power brokers of downtown, like
Power brokers.
the newspapers are oftentimes very important. The chambers of commerce, I think I said this last time, but the chambers of commerce are really important here. The traditional downtown people who own the property, they don't want these neighborhoods there because they view them as both, as I said, they're in the way and they're also bringing the values down. So yeah, they'd rather have nothing.
So one question about, so you said that the suburbs didn't have much transit. And so just a question I had around that, because I've seen some of your maps that involve transit. So you've done an extensive one for Chicago, you've done an extensive one for LA, for New York, and had all these streetcars, as well as longer train lines that went a little bit further out than the actual city boundaries. And so were the suburbs just beyond that? So like, because, transit was also removed and we haven't touched upon mass transit, public transit. So, at what point did that coincide with the highways?
I want to try for that.
Yeah.
Can I try? Now, this is just me trying to remember what I learned in undergrad urban planning literally 30 years ago. So, all right, my guess is that transit, that like light transit, was for bedroom communities, that first ring outside of the inner city, where you had the beginning of middle class community. And I think a lot of that probably got developed post World War II. So you got your like starter home communities in these bedroom neighborhoods. And then, but really what actually established the suburbs was highways. So you could go further out because of, as Adam mentioned, in the 50s, all of a sudden, these regions have a blank check to just build out, make multiple lanes, allow for more cars. All this probably also went in, corresponded with the auto industry too. So all these things, all these forces work together to actually develop what we now know as suburbs beyond. That's my guess.
Pretty close. Sorry. Okay,
Have to be
so
cool.
this is pre-World War II. There was this sort of first generation of suburbs,
Okay.
and they're literally called streetcar suburbs.
So that would have
Um,
been, would that have been in the 20s?
the 20s was the heyday, absolutely.
Okay.
But
Could we
go on.
just use like a city as a model? So whether it's Boston or New York, like just a city. Chicago, okay, Chicago works.
Yeah, Chicago's a good example. But I can't think of any clear streetcar suburbs. Actually, whatever. I mean, San Francisco is a good example. I think Boston is a pretty good example, but
Yes. Yeah.
in terms of like what a streetcar suburb is, like Cambridge is not that. But the thing is, so San Francisco, whatever. There's the downtown, and then there's the streetcar network that they've kept some of. But where the streetcars go there, those were that used to be considered way far outside the city. Now those are like very much urban neighborhoods. They're part of the city. And this develops in like the late 1800s to like just the Depression basically ends a lot of it. But middle class people often wanted to move out of the city. I mean, cities, depending on the city, were dirty and there was this idea that they were unhealthful. That was changing actually quite a lot by this period, with really the rise of public health, and cities were becoming a far better place to live. And what's that?
And parks, right? They were starting to create open spaces where people could actually get fresh air and refuge.
And they viewed that as very much a public health issue. Yeah, exactly. Like the idea of the lungs of the city, right? But regardless, people wanted more space, so the streetcar companies built out to these close-in suburbs. What's more important necessarily than the geography is how the newer suburbs are built. Like, so streetcar suburbs were built around a streetcar station, and it was a grid. So it was like a mini city. Like, and that's why they fit so well in with this. Like, we don't even recognize them now as different. Rather, they're just a part of the city because they've sort of grown together. But these early suburbs there was always like a shop at the tram stop, or like, it was like basically a mini city, a mini downtown, and you could walk to the station. So within the neighborhood, these old streetcar suburbs, it was still walkable. The next generation of suburbs, they are both farther away, but more important than that distance, they dispense with the grid. It's about cul-de-sacs. It's about things that you can only drive. Like, there is no way to walk.
It's not about sidewalks, for
Right,
example.
and even if there are sidewalks, like like I am from one of these suburbs, like a cul-de-sac suburb. Like, there's a Publix, like a grocery store, like half a mile as the crow flies, but the actual walk to not go through people's backyards, which you can't do, is like 2 miles, and it's because of this ridiculous route that they made. Yeah, and it's terrible. So, and that's really the one of the big defining differences between, or rather, what spells the change from transit even being a viable option to these new suburbs. Like, you can't just put the streetcars back, even if they are as close as some of the other streetcar suburbs. Like, it's because the way they've done these grids, and that's actually, there's an interesting case study here in the Netherlands where they did not build as many of these types of cul-de-sac suburbs. That's what I'm calling it. But they did build some. But they've really retrofitted them since then, basically just by building connections through. I mean, it does require taking a small amount of private property for public right of way, but they've just punched through like the cul-de-sac where there's space and just made like a pedestrian grid. And then once you have the pedestrian grid and a bike grid,
Yeah.
then you can really put trams back, because then suddenly, like, if there were a tram like a half a mile away, that's not that bad. Then the streetcars are removed from the remaining neighborhoods, but they become much less important as as automobility becomes more important, because they get stuck in traffic, and there's a lot of problems with the early streetcars. That's not to say they shouldn't have been maintained and upgraded, but regardless. But to the other point in your explanation, sorry, it was that it wasn't the highways that led to those new types of suburbs.
Okay.
It was kind of a feedback loop. It was, and the highways didn't appear out of nowhere. Like, there was iterations of, like, wider surface roads. You know what I mean? So, like, there were state highways. We now call them stroads. I might have talked about that last time. I'll get into that in a second. That I should make a break with this point. But the highways are sort of, it's a feedback loop, right? Because as more people are moving to these automobile only suburbs, then they have to drive. And then there's just more of these people, and they're still, they're going downtown. And those suburbs, really, the genesis of those is a bit earlier than the highways as we think of them today. And the genesis of those is real estate and racism, right? So it's
Right.
right. So I'm gonna stop there. I've lost my point.
Well, you gave us a whole lot of new points.
Yeah. Sorry about
I think where we were kind of starting, when Melanie and I were chatting before you came on, and where we know we want to go is, what are some American solutions? So you've kind of laid out a lot of the problems, laid out how things were developed and how we got to where we are today. And where we didn't allow you to go last time because we ran out of time was, some examples, or an example of where things are being, some reparative actions. So, like, where the highways are being replaced or capped or removed, and like what that means for communities now.
Absolutely. We didn't talk about Rochester last time. We didn't get there.
I wouldn't let you run out of time.
We ran out of time. Exactly. Right.
Right.
Well, and this is great, because this is actually the subject of my dissertation for my PhD. So I work work as a planner / business development person, but I'm also doing a PhD simultaneously, and that's why I'm over here in the Netherlands at TU Delft. They have an incredible urbanism department, architecture program, but places that are doing it right. So, indeed. So Rochester, well, so it depends. There's a couple different strategies, right? So highways, I talk a lot about highways and the damage that they cause to non-white communities, to Black and brown communities.
Can I just interject? I have to do this because my brain is still wanting. Derek's laughing at me. I want to make sure that we understand the backdrop, because the word urban renewal has always unsettled me, because it sounds like a refresh. It sounds like it's of a benefit, but it was, in a way, a cleansing in a negative way. And I think we should just talk about what urban renewal was. So that was like 50s, 60s, right? And then what about that are we trying to undo now? Can you just?
Yeah. I'll go back to history for one more moment. I won't dwell there too much. Well, so urban renewal is another part of the equation. So again, the highways are meant to deal with the traffic problem that is created by the spatial arrangement of white people having left the city and moved to automobile-only places, but still be driving downtown.
And Bostonians know all about that, because I presume that's what the Big Dig ended up trying to fix. Is that right, Derek? All of the loopy highways around Boston?
Not quite. Blocking 95 from going through the city was one way that we did it back in the 50s. But the Big Dig was already there. That already caused the problems downtown. But anyways.
That's all I'm saying. That's what he's describing is all the problems where people are stuck.
Well, the Big Dig is pretty recent, is a bit more recent than what I'm talking about. But
to address the fact that you had all these loops of highways where people were just stuck forever and it was gritty and gross. That was my understanding.
Urban renewal is trying to reverse white flight, or at least reverse some of the effects of it. Whereas the highways are very much kind of facilitating it, and connecting places. and they're not totally separate things, but urban renewal is basically an attempt from those same downtown power brokers to basically leverage federal money to remake the downtown in a way that is even more attractive for suburban white commuters. And what that means in practice is clearing out those neighborhoods that they thought were undesirable, that they view as undesirable. Black neighborhoods, brown neighborhoods, Asian neighborhoods, Chinatowns get destroyed.
Yeah.
But so urban renewal is a way to, and it results in a lot of like empty lots. This is the mechanism by which, because we were talking about highway construction, but this is the mechanism by which you get nothing, is an urban renewal plan where they only fund the demolition and then not the actual subsequent construction, which happened pretty often. There's Los Angeles that happened pretty frequently. But so it's where, in Miami, for instance, like the inner city, quote unquote, inner city neighborhood Overtown, which again is right adjacent to downtown, and the folks in downtown view as an land ripe for expansion because it's right there and it's filled with people that we actively want to remove. When the feds pass money for urban renewal through various bills, but the biggest one is the 49 Housing Act, they give cities a 2/3 match for financial match for urban renewal projects. So the city, if they present it to the feds and say, this is what we want to do, and then if the feds accept, they'll pay for 2/3 of it. So a lot of these places, it's like, well, you should do it because you're leaving money on the table, but from their point of view. But what it means in practice is literally clearing out these neighborhoods and replacing it with big civic centers like urban renewal, like in Roxbury, for instance, the Washington Square. I don't know why it was called that, but it's right near Dudley Square. Washington Park Urban Renewal Program. I can send the link for that. But right near the Dudley Square station, just south where the road kind of curves like that, they clear out the center of Roxbury. And I have some nice before and afters of this. They clear out the center of Roxbury and replace it with a new courthouse and a police station and a big parking lot. So in that case, like that's a little different than purely the down, because that's not quite downtown, but that is very much trying to make it easier for the white government workers to come and do their job there. That actually wasn't the best example because that's all public stuff. But like, in LA, they tear down this neighborhood called Bunker Hill that was a largely Mexican and actually Native American neighborhood, and poor white. But it was a very integrated, fascinating neighborhood, Bunker Hill. But it's adjacent to downtown. It's where that Angel's Flight, that famous little funicular, goes. They tear it down with public money, and then the city has acquired the land through eminent domain, and they basically just use it as leverage to attract businesses. And now it's like where Wells Fargo is based. And renewal. It's cleansing. It's like these neighborhoods are viewed as detrimental to property values and capital, so they are destroyed. And it's not necessarily about, and that's when I said it's not necessarily about reversing white flight, because they don't build a lot of housing. They don't, but they do. It's about reversing the sort of economic effect of white flight. Because they still, there's various interests that like the people living far away and the automobility and the oil and the gas companies, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so they're trying to get companies to come or not leave. And then they're trying to get people to come and work here or come and spend money in like a stadium or a convention center. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that backdrop. Okay. So now, Rochester, for example, what are they doing to undo the impacts from decades ago?
So they've removed some of the highways. There's a question right off the bat as to whether or not that's the right thing to do for reparative justice. It is the right thing to do environmentally, and it's the right thing to do for future generations who might want to live there. But I'm doing this right off the bat, I guess. But the fact of the matter is, like, removing I-95 from Overtown isn't going to bring it back. and that's not to say Overtown's completely gone, but its footprint is much smaller, and the community has really been dispersed to Opa-locka and Miami Gardens and Brownsville and whatnot. But highway removal is for where the community still is there, in a place like Rochester. That's a great option, and it's not that complicated. These highways, you can just take them out. I mean, it's expensive, but most of the interstate has reached the end of its useful life. Like, it has a D- from the American Society of Civil Engineers. They grade stuff. I love that they do that. But yeah, they give America's highways a D. No, not a D-, D+, because it was a C-, but now it's a D+. That's worse. But these structures they're collapsing. In New York, everyone knows the BQE is crumbling. And that was actually one of the reasons for the Big Dig, is that the elevated structure was crumbling, so they replaced it with the underground structure. So these things actually need to be addressed anyway. So now we have to choose if we want to reinvest in them, which ultimately is more expensive in the long run, or if we want to remove them. And so we have to look at what benefit they provide, because they do provide some benefit, freight movement. I don't know why I'm being moderate here, but in a place like Rochester, where the highway was underutilized and devastated the surrounding community, take it out. Just take it out. And I have some visuals if you want to show this visual now.
Sure.
It was a pretty classic situation where that neighborhood on the right and the north. So you see downtown. They have surrounded downtown in a highway loop, and then those two spurs connect out to fairly typical white suburbs that had restrictive covenants, blah, blah, blah. So you can see typical pattern. The highway is designed to bring people from those suburbs to downtown. It literally loops around downtown. The loop becomes pretty popular because then the loop then also literally protects downtown in space. I think I mentioned this last time, from the quote unquote inner city. So in situations where they don't want to just punch through, they can build this wall, and then that becomes a means that is attractive. That becomes a means to uphold property values for the business owners. And they removed it. So let's see the next slide. There you go. So they've taken out that portion on the right there, and they're working now on the portion on the north, on the top there. And this is a really interesting project because you can see where the highway was. There's actually housing now, and it's affordable housing. It's not as affordable as it should be, but that's a different topic. They did indeed attempt to mitigate the gentrification forces that arise from something like this. But before I get to that, what this does is it ties back that neighborhood, that predominantly non-white neighborhood, with the job opportunities downtown. So it is shifting, or at least balancing, the priorities of the transportation network, because you can still see most of the highway still there, and that loop highway was really underutilized. It was a very silly highway, and we have examples of loops that can be partially dismantled all over the country. Detroit's looking at something like that now. Dallas should, Miami should, with the 395, although they're widening that now. But yeah, so this is an interesting project.
How do they make the decisions, Adam? Like, was there much engagement of the communities that live there now?
It arises.
Core. Yeah.
Yes, I interrupted, but yeah, do you want to ask that question again?
No, continue. I think people heard. I was asking, were people who are residents of that inner core or inner city neighborhood where the highway was removed, were they involved in the decision making about that, about whether it should happen, how it should happen, and what would be put in its place?
Yeah, I mean, the idea arose from the community. So it was basically a grassroots
That's amazing.
action. I mean, and that's not always the case. But it is an instance in which the interests are aligned.
Yeah.
Because downtown, that idea of surrounding the downtown with a highway and having people come in and out, it worked for a time. It doesn't really work anymore, especially, I mean, it was falling apart well before COVID. But COVID, with the rise of remote work, but I don't want to overstate the impact of that because it was falling apart before that. It's because people didn't want to necessarily live in the suburbs. It's expensive, it's unsustainable, blah blah blah. So urban renewal didn't always really succeed. It did in some cases.
It's still segregated. I think people are hesitant. I will say, as a realtor, people are often weighing, do I move to the suburbs because schools? And that's the primary driver. Other than that, they actually want to be where the quote unquote action is in the city. And if they could live on public transit and walkable, typically people far prefer that than being essentially off grid and having to drive and having to commute and being in a place that feels more homogeneous culturally and racially and economically. So it's interesting. I would say that Derek and I would be remiss not to mention, speaking of the power of grassroots communities to make an impact like this, to say, okay, here are our interests, let's take this highway down. In Boston, communities, multi-class coalitions of communities of residents from outside the city all the way into close to downtown Boston organized. Would this have been in the 60s, Derek?
50s.
The 50s, to stop a major. It would have been like a 6-lane. What was that? It was going to be 95?
It would have been 95, yeah. So 95 would have punched through. It was called the Southwest Corridor. Now it's called the Southwest Corridor because that's where the rail lines, the Orange Line, Amtrak, and the Providence Line all run through. Because they had, as Adam had said, they had already torn down a lot of Roxbury, parts of JP. They were planning to tear down parts of Rosendale and West Roxbury. And
actually had people move, tore down homes.
Yeah.
Mostly in Roxbury, though. Mostly in Roxbury. And where Ruggles Station is now, where Northeastern is now, there would have been a 6-story or an 8-story high interchange because it would have been an inner loop in addition to the highway going out.
They wanted to do a loop. Yeah, Melnia Cass was like, yeah, exactly.
Was part of that loop. Yeah, so it would have gone through
not the first
way through East Cambridge, I think into Charlestown and Somerville as well, to loop all the way around, probably connecting to the airport as well. So a lot of that was stopped, and it was a multiracial, multi-generational, multi-community coalition because it included Brookline, it included the Fenway, Roxbury, Cambridge. It included a lot of people in a lot of places that really stopped. But the funds were still there. So the governor at the time said, well, we'll shift the funds. I think it was Governor Sargent said, we'll shift the funds to public transportation. And that's why we have that rail corridor there now. The unfortunate thing is that it caused the removal of the Orange Line
elevated, exactly.
Washington Street, at least a mile over to where it is now. So those communities lost out. They lost out again. And then they got a couple of bus lines, which are really inadequate. So they lost the foot traffic. They lost the public transportation. They lost a lot, actually, because of that. So, and unfortunately,
they were
Dudley just happened to be right in the triangulation of all of those things.
And Dudley Station looked so cool. If you've seen old photos of it, because it was the elevated, and then there were the tram lines underneath. But yeah, they replaced it with the Silver Line bus, which is a joke.
But just to say, so that corridor, I've lived in Boston 21 years now, so I only know of Boston with this Southwest Corridor line that Derek has described, where you've got subway, commuter train, and Amtrak. There's also what you see on the ground is parks. It's all essentially a continuous park along that rail line. You've got tennis courts, community gardens, and property values correspond to that corridor.
Oh, of course. But
the loss of the people who used to live there.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I remember as a child being there before a lot of that was built. It was just flattened ground, nothing there, except for maybe some huge, 2-story mounds of dirt.
Because of the raising, just to make that clear to our...
Yeah, because of the raising, and they were like, oh, what do we do with this dirt? We'll just leave it here.
Roxbury.
Yeah. Yeah, it was...
it's like you could see some of the prime sections of Jamaica Plain real estate and desirability. It's right around the Southwest Corridor, and on one side of the Southwest Corridor, I'll say, along the train lines that run through that strip.
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. People Before Highway Days, or People Before Highway Day, and then there's a great book by Professor Carolyn Crockett called People Before Highways. it's about that this whole movement to defeat 95, and it is a success story. And then the Roxbury Land Trust forms in the wake of that, and that's a pretty successful model, I think, for retaining community control and community ownership, which is important. But yeah, and then just to put a pin in the Rochester point, you know, it was an instance where interests were aligned because downtown, this highway was underutilized. They realized that it was a mistake, that urban renewal didn't really work, and that if we remove it, we can make this downtown more vibrant. It was part of. There was also a giant museum expansion that was a part of it. So it was kind of a win-win in that situation. And the highway critically had no constituency. Unlike some of these other highways that we're trying to remove, no one used this highway. And there are situations in like Oakland where we really need to remove the 980. There is a bit of a constituency because some people use it, but it was way overbuilt. It divided West Oakland from downtown. It was used as a model for other cities to divide neighborhoods. I mentioned last time, I think, about Belfast. Yeah, the Irish folks. Or So it's complicated. We should remove them where we can, but that won't bring the community back. It is something we should do for future generations, though.
So I agree, and I know that we're short on time. Actually, you have to run, but
sorry.
No need to apologize. But I do want to ask this question, and I asked this last time, and you were like, "I need time to think about it." So I hope you thought about it.
Oh damn! I might not have.
That's okay.
Welcome to my life, Adam.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, please. So.
Oh no, I meant. Yeah. Sorry. Go on. Okay.
He asked big questions, and I'm like, oh, I forgot we had that conversation. Continue.
I'm happy to remind always. So the question is, given the climate that we're in, the political climate we're in, where it's all about not addressing burying history, not addressing things around diversity and reparative actions and all that. Your work, as simple as it presents complicated information, raises a lot of questions. I mean, we've now had 2 conversations full of questions, and so it's like, what kind of response are you getting to this work as the climate is changing?
The response hasn't changed much since the election. It depends. I'm lucky, I think. I don't know. I've gotten a pretty positive response. There's occasional trolls, but that's like that's like everywhere, But no, I've gotten a pretty positive response because I think I just show it. I'm an architect and I rely really heavily on the visuals.
Yeah.
And showing it exactly, like, because I am not the first person. I'm not the originator of a lot of this research. I'm really standing on the shoulders of people like Deborah Archer, of giants, of people who have been researching this decades, or who straight up lived through it, or have parents who lived through it. I am standing, or I am would not be able to do any of this without their work. But what I'm doing is just trying to package it in a way that's not reductionist. Is crucial, although sometimes I think I am, but that's not reductionist. But that is accessible. It's all about accessibility. You shouldn't have to really know anything about urban planning to understand what I'm trying to show, and that's one of the other reasons I like just pictures and urban and aerial photos. But the response has been positive, and it's been great in places where they are fighting for projects like Rochester, or unfortunately to stop expansions. So not even at the point of fighting for removal, but trying to stop the harm in the first place. Like this group in Texas, Stop TxDOT I-45. There's this big, did I mention this? There's this big highway expansion going on in Houston. And it's displaced like 1,000 people, or no, sorry, 1,000 families. So I don't know the exact number. The vast majority Black and brown. It was a public housing project that accounted for like 600 of the units demolished. Crazy. But I've been working with them not for a while now. so I should get back in touch. But helping them or amplifying their message, helping them. But that sounds arrogant, but amplifying their message where possible. So no, the response has been quite positive. It does always beg the question, like, well, so what do we do next? And I do like where the community already has an idea, and I can just support what they're doing. But it really depends on the situation. Like, there's various models. Not every place is the Rochester model going to work. It's also reliant very much on top-down sort of planning. It's like, is the solution for the harms to top-down planning more top-down planning?
Yeah.
It's part of it, probably, but that's why, again, I like something like the Roxbury Land Trust, and it's not. I need to look. Land Trust as a model is something that I need to understand more. But as far as I understand it, this nonprofit developer, which is made up of people in the community, owns various properties in Roxbury and develops them according to what the group wants. They have financial, or they're trying to make enough money to cover themselves, but the point is that they own it. They own the land, and that's critical. You guys do real estate, of course, because in this country, that's power, especially these days.
Well said.
So, and that's the solution for some places, but you have to have a lot of capital to do that. It's self-sustaining because it's real estate, and they own the land. So yeah, it depends on the situation. Not every place is removal going to work. You do need big roads some places. People think that I want to. I mean, I'm very anti-automobile, but we do need. There's a problem with look, it would be great if we could move everybody by bus or train, everybody by transit, by walking, bus or train, or biking, and then all freight by train or boat. That would be great. It's not. I think actually maybe we can get the goal of getting everyone on transit or sustainable modes. That is a little more achievable, I think, because that has. I live here in the Netherlands, and it's like the result of so many people biking and taking transit is that actually driving is a lot easier for the people that do drive because there's less traffic. But that's a more solvable problem, I think, actually, although culturally it's hard. But the issue of freight distribution is really hard, and we have to have freight because we need stuff. As much as we would like to say we don't. So you do need trucks to some extent. So some highways we should maybe have between cities, not within.
That's a funny note to end on. Some highways we should have.
Between cities. Well, it's we should move everything to more sustainable modes where possible. But there is a last mile problem.
Yeah.
Well, Melanie, I'm surprised you're not mentioning urban gardening. Instead of increased trucking. I mean, I know this is getting way off topic now, but I mean,
not really. It's a part of it.
Stuff. Why don't we have more urban gardening, or at least in the food realm?
I mean, I'm not gonna. That can't replace maybe major greenhouses. That wouldn't.
Yeah, that'd have to be vertical.
Our need exactly. We have to do vertical something. Our need for food and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also thinking about the impact of if you just have fewer cars, asthma levels would drop in poor Black neighborhoods. Right. So there's all connected, related benefits to getting this right and getting with it.
But the flip side, and one of the reasons, and I really should have said this earlier, one of the reasons that removal or capping or these sort of really ambitious programs isn't always the best solution is because it might result in gentrification that destroys whatever of that community is left.
It has to be right. So it has to be a policy approach that, like is happening in
Rochester. Exactly.
There's a very decided approach on what affordable housing is and should be. And I mean, this is all complex. It does take people agreeing in a multi-class way, agreeing on certain principles and holding to them.
Mm-hmm. And that's why some of the coalition, look at some of the, well, I don't want to say, but some of these removal projects are supported by, or capping projects are supported by developers because they know it is government investment that they can take advantage of.
There's investment and zoning. Those two things need to be, those things could actually make it go well. If the zoning fits the priorities that we're talking about, and then there's ways for investors to tap money to make it happen, then it'll happen.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry. And I know I was the one extending the point, even though I'm the one that has to run, but yeah. we'll wrap it up.
I enjoy watching the two of you go back and forth because you both have a background.
It's so fun
in public. What is it? Public policy.
Well, I care about urban planning. I'm not a planner. I've never been a planner, but I did study urban planning, and Adam is right in the thick of it and does it, and so. Yeah.
And living in Boston for 20 years, you said?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that is practical. I mean, you're not planning, but you're seeing the city every damn day.
Real estate, and so I understand.
Well, and real estate.
And the possibilities.
If you didn't have an opinion, that would be weirder, or at least some thought,
Especially
at least
Bostonian.
Exactly, where city planning like affects you every day.
Yeah.
And for centuries.
Because real estate
For
also.
centuries.
Yeah. And so this is all tied to what kind of decisions we make and don't make about zoning and what developers are allowed to do or are encouraged to do and not do. So yeah, I mean, you can puzzle, like we understand the indications of gentrification. We understand what leads to it. Okay. Well, let's make decisions that reverse that or that don't take us further down that road, but there needs to be political commitments for that.
Yeah. Well, and then if we take a step back, if we reduce inequality, then gentrification is not that big of a deal in the first place, but it doesn't always equate to friggin' race, and it doesn't American stuff. Like if we reduce inequality, then gentrification it's bad, but cities do change, and the way that
Agree. Actually, I'm fine with things changing, but it's about access and equity.
Equity, exactly.
Really, is really what the concern is. Yeah, I don't inherently have a problem. I'm not like, oh, do not gentrify, do not develop. That's not inherently a concern to me, but it's about the impacts.
So gentrification can be split into two pieces. So gentrification is displacement, and it's also improvement. So it's like, how do you manage the two sides of that? And maybe there's more sides, but those are the two that I identify with gentrification. But we do have to go.
Yeah,
we like talking
for time.
This is good.
and maybe someday Adam will come back again when we have more time.
Yeah, definitely.
But for now, we appreciate the 2 times you've come on.
Absolutely, no, it's always a blast. You guys are it's very fun.
Appreciate that. So for those of you who are listening and watching, again, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them on whatever platform you are listening or watching on. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you on the next episode of the Black Lining Forum. Take care.
Ciao.